The billionaire was famous for two things, his wealth and his ego. That night, he was hosting one of the most exclusive business parties in the city. A luxury penthouse overlooking the skyline, crystal chandeliers glowing above, and some of the most powerful investors and CEOs laughing with glasses of expensive wine in their hands. Every detail screamed status. And the billionaire loved it. He moved through the room like a king, shaking hands, boasting about deals, and making sure everyone knew exactly who was in charge. But there was one habit he never let go of. His driver. Steven Seagal. 4 years, the billionaire had treated Steven as nothing more than entertainment, cracking jokes about him in front of others, mocking his quiet nature, reminding everyone that Steven was just the driver. Steven never argued. Never reacted. He simply did his job and stayed silent. Earlier that day, while preparing the guest list, the billionaire laughed and said to his assistant, "Why don't we invite Steven too?" The assistant hesitated. "Sir, your driver?" "Yes," the billionaire smirked. "It'll be fun. Let everyone see him out of his place." The idea amused him. A simple driver surrounded by billionaires, awkward, uncomfortable, exposed. Perfect. An invitation was sent. When Steven received it, he read it carefully. No smile. No anger. No surprise. He folded the card and placed it calmly on the table. That alone should have raised questions. But the billionaire didn't notice. As the night approached, guests expected laughter, power moves, and a little humiliation for entertainment. What none of them knew was this. They weren't inviting a joke. They were inviting a truth that would shake the entire room. Steven Seagal read the invitation one more time that evening. The words were polite. Formal. Almost respectful. But he understood the intention behind it. He had spent years watching the billionaire smile in public and mock him in private. This invitation wasn't about inclusion. It was about humiliation. Still, Steven accepted. He didn't ask questions. He didn't complain. He didn't even mention it to anyone. Instead, he folded the invitation neatly and placed it inside a drawer, beside documents and memories no one else had ever seen. The next morning, as always, Steven arrived early. He inspected the car, polished the exterior, and checked every detail with precision. His movements were calm, disciplined, not rushed, not careless. People who passed by sometimes wondered why a man like him was a driver. Steven carried himself differently. Straight posture. Steady eyes. A silence that felt intentional, not weak. When the billionaire stepped into the car that afternoon, Steven greeted him with the same respect he always showed. "Big night tonight," the billionaire said casually, adjusting his cufflinks. "Make sure you're on time." "I will," Steven replied simply. No sarcasm. No resentment. As they drove through the city, the billionaire spoke endlessly about deals, power, and money. Steven listened quietly, occasionally responding with short, thoughtful remarks, observations that were sharper than they needed to be. Once, the billionaire paused. "You've got opinions for a driver." Steven met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Calm. Focused. "Experience teaches many things," he said. That answer lingered in the air longer than expected. At a red light, the billionaire checked his phone and laughed, dismissing the moment. He didn't notice the way Steven's grip on the steering wheel was relaxed, confident, like a man who had driven far more than just cars. As the city lights passed by, Steven's expression never changed. But behind that silence was a past carefully kept hidden. A past that didn't need to speak. Because soon, the room would speak for him. The entrance to the penthouse glowed with excess. Luxury cars lined the driveway, each more expensive than the last. Valets rushed back and forth as men in tailored suits and women draped in designer gowns stepped onto the marble floor, laughing confidently, greeting one another by last names that carried weight. Steven Seagal arrived quietly. He stepped out of the car wearing simple, clean clothes, nothing flashy, nothing designed to impress. No watch that caught the light. No tailored suit. Just a man who looked comfortable in his own skin. The moment he entered the room, a few heads turned. Then the whispers began. "Isn't that the driver? Why is he here? Did he get lost?" Steven noticed none of it, or at least, he gave no sign that he did. He walked in calmly, his posture straight, his expression neutral. Across the room, the billionaire spotted him instantly. A slow smile spread across his face. Well, he said loudly, raising his glass. "Looks like everyone made it." He gestured toward Steven. "Including my driver." Laughter rippled through the room. Some guests smiled awkwardly. Others laughed more freely, enjoying the subtle cruelty of the moment. Stephen was guided toward the center of the room, placed deliberately under the chandelier's bright light, exposed. So, Stephen, the billionaire continued, make yourself comfortable. You don't see places like this often, do you? Stephen met his gaze. Calm. Unbothered. It's a beautiful view, he replied. The answer wasn't defensive. It wasn't submissive. It was confident. That alone caused a few guests to exchange glances. Stephen stood quietly as conversations resumed around him, but the energy in the room had shifted. People kept looking at him, trying to understand why he didn't seem embarrassed. Why his silence didn't feel small. One investor leaned toward another and whispered, that man doesn't look out of place. Another murmured, he's standing like he belongs here. The billionaire, sensing the shift, frowned slightly. This wasn't going the way he imagined. The joke had been set. But the punchline hadn't landed. And for the first time that night, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar. Unease. As the evening progressed, the party shifted from polite small talk to serious business conversation. Clusters of investors formed around glass tables, discussing mergers, market trends, and billion-dollar risks. The billionaire stood proudly among them, enjoying the attention, until he noticed something unexpected. Stephen was listening. Not casually. Not passively. Intently. When one executive complained about a failing overseas expansion, Stephen spoke, not loudly, not to impress, but clearly. The problem isn't the market, Stephen said. It's the timing. You entered during political uncertainty. Wait 6 months, restructure logistics, and you'll recover. The group fell silent. The executive blinked. That's exactly what our consultants said last week. A few heads turned. Another guest laughed nervously. Interesting insight for a driver. Stephen didn't react. He simply nodded. Experience helps. The billionaire stiffened. As more conversations unfolded, Stephen continued, occasionally adding precise, intelligent observations. He spoke about supply chains, leadership failures, and long-term vision with the calm certainty of someone who had been there before. Not once did he overstep. Not once did he boast. Guests began listening, truly listening. One whispered, where did he learn all this? Another murmured, he's sharper than half the room. The billionaire's smile faded. He watched as attention slowly drifted toward Stephen, not because Stephen demanded it, but because his words carried weight. Irritation crept in. So, the billionaire interrupted loudly, forcing a laugh, since when does my driver advise CEOs? Stephen turned toward him calmly. Since you invited me. The room froze. The response wasn't disrespectful. It was undeniable. Silence stretched. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. The billionaire forced a smile, but his eyes burned with something darker than embarrassment. This wasn't supposed to happen. The driver wasn't supposed to speak. The driver wasn't supposed to belong. Yet there Stephen stood, calm, composed, and slowly unraveling everything the billionaire thought he controlled. And the night was only just beginning. The billionaire could feel the room slipping away from him. Every time Stephen spoke, heads turned. Every calm sentence chipped away at the image the billionaire had carefully built, the unquestioned authority, the man no one challenged. He needed control back. So let's be clear, the billionaire said loudly, his voice sharp with forced humor. We're all enjoying this little performance, but at the end of the day. He turned toward Stephen. You're just my driver. The words hung in the air like a slap. A few guests chuckled nervously. Others looked away, uncomfortable. The insult was too direct now. Too personal. Stephen didn't react immediately. He took a slow breath, then looked at the billionaire, not with anger, not with pride, but with calm certainty. Only by title, Stephen said. The room went silent. No clinking glasses. No whispers. Just stillness. The billionaire blinked. Excuse me? Stephen met his gaze. Titles don't define contribution. They define convenience. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Several guests exchanged looks. This was no longer entertainment. One man near the back frowned thoughtfully. He had been staring at Stephen all night, studying his face, his posture. Wait, he murmured. I've seen him before. The billionaire laughed loudly, trying to break the tension. Seen him where? Driving my car. But the man didn't laugh back. Another guest leaned closer. He's right. That man speaks like someone who's been in boardrooms, not behind a wheel. Stephen said nothing more. He didn't press his advantage. He didn't explain himself. And that made it worse for the billionaire. Because every second Stephen stayed silent, the room filled the gaps with questions. Who was this man? Why wasn't he intimidated? Why didn't he need to prove anything? The billionaire's smile faded completely. His fingers tightened around his glass. He realized, too late, that the joke had turned on him. The humiliation he planned for Stephen was now circling back, slowly, inevitably. And somewhere in the room, a powerful guest was about to speak the truth out loud. The silence was broken by a man standing near the far end of the room. He was older than most of the guests, dressed simply but with unmistakable authority. When he spoke, his voice carried weight, the kind that didn't need volume. That's enough. Everyone turned. The billionaire forced a laugh. Ah, Mr. Harrison. Enjoying the show? The man didn't smile. His eyes were fixed on Stephen. I wasn't sure at first, he said slowly, stepping closer. But now I recognize him. The room leaned in. You recognize my driver? The billionaire scoffed. Mr. Harrison nodded. I recognize the man who signed the original investment papers. The words landed like thunder. What? The billionaire whispered. Mr. Harrison turned to the crowd. Before this company ever became what it is today, there was one man who believed in it when no one else did. One man who put his money, his strategy, and his name on the line, quietly. He pointed to Stephen. That man is Steven Seagal. Gasps rippled through the room. The billionaire staggered back slightly. That's not possible. Stephen reached into his jacket calmly and removed a thin folder. He placed it on the table without drama. Inside were documents. Signatures. Dates. Proof. I never needed the spotlight, Stephen said evenly. I prefer to stay behind the wheel. Mr. Harrison added, he's the silent partner. The original investor. And legally. He paused. The majority owner. The billionaire's face drained of color. You let me, his voice cracked. Stephen met his eyes. I let you lead. There's a difference. The room was frozen in shock. Powerful men and women stared at Stephen with new eyes, not as a driver, but as the foundation beneath everything they admired. Stephen closed the folder. I drove you to meetings, he said calmly. I listened. I watched. I waited. He looked around the room. And tonight, you showed everyone who you really are. No anger. No triumph. Just truth. And it was devastating. The billionaire stood frozen, his face pale under the chandeliers. For the first time that night, the room saw him without his armor, no laughter, no bravado, no mask of control. Only shock and humiliation. Guests whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that said what no one dared to speak aloud. The joke had completely backfired. Finally, the billionaire cleared his throat. Stephen? I owe you an apology, he stammered. I misjudged you. Stephen raised a hand, stopping him. There's no need for apologies for truth, he said calmly. Respect is earned, yes, but it is also recognized when it is due. The room fell silent again. Every eye was on him. Every person felt the weight of his words. Stephen didn't gloat. He didn't mock. He simply stood tall, composed, and dignified, a man who had been underestimated his whole life, now finally acknowledged. A few powerful guests stepped forward, offering handshakes and nods of respect. One executive murmured, he's been carrying this company quietly, behind the scenes. Another added, and we never even knew. The billionaire swallowed hard. The arrogance that had defined him for decades was gone. In its place, a humbled man who realized that wealth without respect, without integrity, was meaningless. Stephen spoke one final time, his voice calm, yet piercing. True wealth is not in money, cars, or parties. True wealth is in respect, in integrity, and in the courage to remain humble. Applause broke out around the room. Not the polite kind of applause meant to fill empty air, but genuine appreciation, for Stephen, and for the lesson he had silently delivered. The billionaire nodded, quietly acknowledging the truth he could no longer ignore. He had been taught humility not by failure, not by public ridicule, but by someone he considered beneath him. As the party continued, Stephen moved through the room with the same calm confidence he had shown from the beginning. Guests now looked at him differently. They listened when he spoke. They respected the man they had dismissed as a driver. And the moral of the story lingered in the air, stronger than any party lights or music. Status and titles do not define a person. Respect, humility, and integrity do. Stephen smiled faintly, almost to himself. The joke had completely turned around. And in that moment, he understood. Sometimes, the greatest victories are the quietest. The story ends with the billionaire humbled, the guests enlightened, and Steven Seagal's dignity, wisdom, and patience shining brighter than any wealth in the room. If you believe respect and integrity matter more than status, type respect in the comments and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.